I do want to welcome you to Inside Israel. Tonight's episode is called No More Yellow Shirts. And I'll explain what that title means in just a moment. So many of you wrote in with questions today. Often people will write in ahead of time, a day or two, but a lot of you wrote today, obviously related to the devastating news out of Israel. We woke up here in Israel this morning to the news that, as I'm sure you've heard, 6 hostages were found dead in a tunnel underneath Rafiah. And one of those was Hersh Polin. And he's in many ways become the face of the hostages, certainly for people overseas and around the world because of his American roots. I went to Camp Ramah with his dad, John. We were not really close at camp. I knew of him. He was older than me, so we weren't really buddies, but his name was a recognizable name. And so I think Hersh Poland, he checked a lot of the boxes that especially American Jews can relate to. The Camp Ramah background, the parents from the Midwest, fluent in English, living in Jerusalem. He was very relatable and let's face it, a friendly looking guy, the kind of guy that when you see his picture, you knew you wanted to be friends with him. And he became the face of the hostages for us here in Israel as well. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there was just such a strong campaign by his parents. You know, some hostage families have chosen to be largely silent. Some have chosen to be kind of in the middle, and speaking out a little bit, but not too much. Hirsch's parents, I should say Hirsch Zichrono Livracha, Hirsch's parents were very vocal from the beginning. Had an excellent social media team. From what I heard, it was volunteers, people coming together to broadcast the message and share who he was. And I think the idea was that the more we can put a face, not just on Hirsch, but on all the hostages, the more people will see them as human beings and not just part of the massacre or not just part of some Israeli war machine that crushes Palestinians the way Palestinian media and social media has been trying to portray. And I think the Polands were very successful. We all know who Hirsch is and was, and so it was really shocking to hear this morning that he'd been shot. And then he was found dead with the 5 others. And then as the news came out, it became even more horrifying that they were alive as recently as 48 hours ago, 72 hours ago, that most likely after the freeing, the rescue, the escape of um, the hostage who's from Rahat, who's Bedouin, Arabic speaking. You know, we're still unclear on exactly what that story is. The initial story was that he simply escaped on his own, and then that story was changed to he was rescued by the IDF. We really still don't know, but in any case, it appears that after he escaped, Hamas um, shot these other 6 hostages, and it could be because they were fleeing. You know, the IDF is still operating in Rafiah. Uh, I was downstairs in the lobby of my apartment building about an hour ago, and I ran into my downstairs neighbor, and he just got back from Gaza today, and he's going back on Wednesday. He's stationed in Rafiah. He's, I think, 24 years old, a university student, but in the reserves and in the combat engineers. And I didn't even know this, but I was speaking to his mom the other day, and she mentioned that her son is in Gaza right now. And we got into a long conversation basically about how much she's not sleeping at night, how much her life has been upended just by having him there. And I guess the point of that little tangent is to tell you that the IDF is still operating in Rafiah, and it could be that they were getting close to where these hostages were, and the Hamas guards simply, the ones who were guarding the hostages, simply decided to flee, didn't want the extra quote unquote baggage of having to worry about these hostages, and so shot them execution style. From what we've heard, they were shot in the head as well as in other places. At least one of them had been tied up recently. They had not bathed for a very long time. That was another piece of news. So really horrific conditions. And I want to tell you that as we walked around Israel today, you saw it on everyone's faces. I mean, people were crushed. This was devastating news for all of us, not just that we lost six of our fellow citizens, but it really drove home the point that the hostages are still there. I think it's sad to say, but we have gotten a little bit used to the idea of hostages being there. We see the posters, the rallies in support of hostage families have been happening every Saturday night. And it's human beings, what makes us amazing is that we adapt to every circumstance. And unfortunately, we've a little bit adapted to this as well. And it's become a normal part of our lives to know that there are hostages there. And so when we got the news that six, and especially one in particular that we know was gone, you saw it on people's faces today as we walked around the country. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about the implications of this. I'm going to sip water first before I do. But even before I do that, I want to talk about the title of tonight's broadcast, which is No More Yellow Shirts. And that really refers to two things. First of all, it literally means that there are no more yellow shirts available in the country. Today, September 1st, is the first day of school for kids in Israel. Unlike in the US, where different school districts start on different days, in Israel, every year, it's always September 1st, unless it's a Saturday Shabbat. Then in that case, it would be September 2nd. But otherwise, September 1st is the first day of school, and that was today. And many schools requested that students wear yellow shirts. In general, in Israel, there's no school uniforms, but you are required to wear a t-shirt or sweatshirt or a long sleeve, sort of t-shirt style long sleeve shirt with the symbol of your school on the breast pocket. So you would go to like Fox Clothing and you would buy six shirts for 100 shekels, and that includes them ironing on the symbol of the school onto the pocket. So there aren't uniforms per se, but you are required to wear this t-shirt or sweatshirt and have the symbol on there. And many schools requested that kids wear a yellow shirt today for the hostages. And we have to just, pause right there and think about what that means. I mean, kids in kindergarten, first, second grade, wearing a certain color shirt because of hostages. I mean, that's frightening. It's harrowing. It's very sad that at such a young age you're having to do that to remember hostages from your own country. But in any case, it's pretty much impossible to get a yellow shirt for a child at this point. All the stores are sold out. We went the other day to get one for my kid who started school today, and we couldn't find one, so we dug up one from last year that was too small on him, and the sleeves kind of coming up to the shoulders, but at least he had the yellow shirt on. But this is a positive angle. I think it shows you Israelis remember, Israelis pay attention. We never forget. And it shows you how people took this seriously, that they made sure to the extent that they could that their kids would have this yellow shirt for the first day of school to remember the Hatufim, to remember the hostages. But there's another meaning to this title, No More Yellow Shirts. And this second meaning, I'll explain. The second meaning is that I think the death of Hersh and these other hostages is sort of signaled to the public that enough with the symbolism, enough with yellow shirts, enough with yellow ribbons on our car door handles or our car antennas. That's another thing you'll see in Israel is a yellow ribbon tied around the handle of a car on the antenna. Enough of posters, enough of dog tags, all of these symbols, all these little things we do to remember the hostages. It's enough of that. We need to actually take action. We need to actually do something more than just tie ribbons on places and wear dog tags and t-shirts. Not that those aren't important because they helped us remember, but the situation has gotten very desperate. And so no more yellow shirts also means enough with the symbolism. We need to actually do things. And you're already seeing this. Tomorrow, there's a general strike here in Israel. That means that all public institutions are going to be closed. And that includes the airport, Ben Gurion Airport, as of 8 a.m. tomorrow, will be closed for incoming flights and for takeoffs. This is the Histadrut labor union in Israel decided that the government is not taking the action it should to get a deal done to free the hostages. And so they called a general strike. So here in Ra'anana, all public institutions will be closed, City Hall, etc. School is let out early. My daughter did not have high school today, but that's a different reason because traditionally the first day of school is a strike by the teachers union. It's rare to have a school year actually start for high school on the first day. But tomorrow she doesn't have school either. My younger kid, who's in ninth grade, which is still middle school, they're let out early. The only schools that have regular full days tomorrow in the country anywhere are special needs schools because these kids need obviously the services and education. But stores related, a lot of private businesses in stores are closing as well voluntarily. This is not mandated by the labor union, but this is just by choice. The whole high-tech industry is, from what I've heard, taking a day off so that people can protest. So this is the action that No More Yellow Shirts refers to. And tonight there was a huge rally in Tel Aviv. I went to it myself. I can tell you a little bit about it. To say that it was packed does not accurately describe what my experience was. It was frighteningly claustrophobic at some points. It was just massive, massive amounts of people in central Tel Aviv, completely. Hang on. It was completely spontaneous. This was not something arranged through with speakers. There was no podium where anyone gave speeches. There were people with bullhorns shouting and saying what we wanted, freeing the hostages now, get a deal done. But it was not official with speakers lined up. It was more just an outpouring of people that of frustration and very fed up. We have to do something. And that brings me to my first point. I do wonder if the horrific killing of these six hostages might in some way be a game changer, might in some way change public opinion, both in Israel, but also in the United States. You know, one story that I'm still trying to wrap my head around involves the University of Maryland. And some of you may be aware of this, that the University of Maryland has granted a permit to Students for Justice in Palestine to hold a massive pro-Palestinian rally on October 7th. So on October 7th at the University of Maryland, the big rally on the college green is going to be a pro-Palestinian, and that also means anti-Israel rally. And of course, Hillel is protesting this and trying to explain to the university how wrong-headed, how just absolutely backwards this is, and also demeaning to Jewish students. But I do wonder if the killing of Hersh Polin as an American, as a face that people know, if maybe the University of Maryland would backtrack and they would just realize how absolutely ridiculous it is to grant a permit that on October 7th, the big rally on campus would be pro-Palestinian. I wonder if politicians in the US might be a little more forceful in terms of their support of Israel because Hersh was killed, because he's recognizable, because his parents spoke at the Democratic National Convention. We did see Kamala Harris make a strong statement saying that Hamas needs to be eliminated. We also got the news that I believe the person she appointed to be in charge of Arab American affairs at one point said that Zionists rule the country or rule politics. Now, granted, she did say this when she was in college. I don't know how much stake we can put into something that someone says when they're 22. I know Josh Shapiro had some statements he had said in college, which, we need to say, hey, we have to grow past that. But I do wonder if the killing of Hersh in particular might change how Americans view Hamas and start to realize that his brutal execution, maybe they don't want to be standing up for this when they support, quote unquote, support Palestinians. So I do wonder if it will be a game changer in that sense. A little bit more about the rally tonight I want to share with you. Like I said, there was nothing really happening. Once I got there, I was, shoulder to shoulder between people. And I turned to the woman next to me at one point and I said, well, now what? And she said, this is it. This is the highlight. She said in Hebrew, like this is why you're here, just to be here. And It did make me wonder how effective these big mass rallies are. I mean, I think they're totally necessary. We have to demonstrate. But at the same time, I can see why the government ignores them. It it was, I was paying attention to who was there. It seemed and I said this last time I went to a rally as well. It seemed overwhelmingly Ashkenazi and sort of upper class. Now, of course, you never know someone's roots and where they come from, but I just got the sense that it seemed like it was a very certain segment of the population. 500,000 sounds like a lot, but it definitely did not feel representative of like a cross section of Israeli society. I saw only one person with a kippah on, so I did not see anyone with tzitzit or kippah other than this one person. Not that I saw all 500,000 who were there, but again, it seems like a certain progressive, liberal, secular population is the one attending these rallies and not the population at large, which also signals to me that I can understand why politicians wouldn't pay so much attention to them and why they would easily dismiss them. In terms of why I attended the rally in the first place, I've been on the fence as to how effective they are, whether they actually can make change, whether I actually want to participate. Sometimes I feel they've been too political and they can actually cause more disunity than unity. I've sometimes wondered if they embolden Hamas, that by showing how much we want the hostages released, it encourages Hamas to up their demands. But the reason I went tonight was because the Hostage Family Forum, this is the main body representing hostages, asked that people come out to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv to these rallies. And I feel that when they ask, we need to go. I'm blessed that I don't have family members in Gaza, God forbid. When those who do ask us to show up and show support, I kind of feel we need to without really questioning. We need to show them that we are there for them. Now, one of you wrote in with a question that I'm not going to directly address in the question section, but I do want to mention now about the Tikva Family Forum. Tikva Family Forum, these are families of hostages who do not feel that there should be a deal necessarily at any price, but that we should continue to pressure Hamas through military action. And the person who asked this question wrote, said something like, I'm sick of the hostage family forum getting all the attention when there's this other forum. It is smaller, but it does exist, that believes that pressure on Hamas and military action is what's needed. So I guess I want to explain why I attended this one from that angle as well. From what I am reading and hearing and just the research I'm doing, it really does seem that the IDF, the Shin Bet, which is internal security, the Mossad, which is like external spy network, that our branches of the military really do believe that we can have a deal right now and still keep Israel safe. And do I trust that? When you wrote in with this question, which I will address in the question section, I think I have to. But if what I'm hearing from so many places is that a deal can happen and Israel still would be safe with a deal, then I feel it's time. And especially when we see at this point, there's only 64 hostages left living. There's 97 in Gaza, but it's estimated or pretty much confirmed that 33 have already been killed. So that's leaving 64 living hostages. We need to get them out. And it seems at this point that there are enough leaders and enough of our security and defense institutions who are saying that a deal will not harm the country, that I feel we have no choice but to believe them. Otherwise, we will not get any living hostages out. But that sums up my sort of little summary of what today was like here in Israel, and what no more yellow shirts means. I think this will be a game changer. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I think, especially with Hersh gone, things will never be the same. We are turning the page and moving on to a new chapter. I'm going to take a quick break just to hydrate. I'll be back in about 30 seconds. So now we're going to address some of the questions that you sent in. I can't get to all of them because so many of you wrote. I'm glad you're writing. But I tried to choose a few that sort of fit under the umbrella of what everyone is concerned with. Our first question is from Elaine, and it actually is very similar to one that someone just asked in the chat, although they asked it to me privately. Let me see if I can, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and post it in the chat to everyone so you can read. It's really the same version of the question. Basically, the whole disagreement right now is about this thing called the Philadelphia corridor. This is the border between Gaza and Egypt. It's 14 miles long. And Netanyahu wants to keep troops, a certain number of troops, in the Philadelphia corridor for a 6-week period during one of the stages of a potential ceasefire deal. And Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister, and Herzi Halevi, who's the chief of staff of the IDF, and Ronen Bar, who's the head of the Shin Bet, all say that this is not necessary, that we should not keep insisting on having troops in the Philadelphia corridor for that 6-week period. And they're also going even further and saying that the only reason Netanyahu is demanding this is for political reasons, because he knows that Ben Gvir and Smotrich will abandon him and abandon the government if he allows the deal to go through. So that Netanyahu is dafka, as we say in Hebrew slang, insisting that there be troops in the Philadelphia corridor. And so what Elaine asked and what this couple asked right here is, why should we trust why should we trust these generals? Why should we trust the chief of staff of the IDF? Why should we trust the minister of defense? Why should we trust intelligence and the head of the Shin Bet? They were the ones who were wrong about everything, Elaine says, that led to October 7th. How can Israelis trust what they say about withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor? And I think the whole feeling that Gallant is saying is that if we do leave for 6 weeks, that if Hamas were to attack, we could attack them, we could hit them hard back, that we have electronic sensors in the ground. The whole issue with the Philadelphia corridor is that it's the border between Egypt and Gaza, and it's been found that this has been the main point of smuggling weapons across into Gaza. How did all these weapons get into Gaza? How did all the cement and the other materials to build the tunnels? It's from Egypt, both tunnels underground, but also just overground. So what, I do want to say Netanyahu does have a point. I'm not a Netanyahu fan, but he does have a point that the key to Israel's safety is the Philadelphia corridor. If we do not guard that, then more weapons can come in to Hamas. And now what the chief of staff and minister of defense are saying is that we have enough means between electronic surveillance and other technology to make sure that these weapons would not come in from Egypt. But Elaine's question and what you're seeing in the chat, it's a relevant question. Why should we believe this? These are the same leaders of institutions who said that we had enough electronic surveillance before October 7th, and look what happened. They were completely wrong. And she says, not being a military expert, I'm sure I don't have the whole picture, but on the other hand, seeing the dismal record of the army leading up to October 7th, how can we believe what they say? And then she said, I hope you don't think this letter is impertinent. I'm truly interested. And I know you're not trying to be impertinent or blustery, that you genuinely are concerned about this. So I have 3 answers for this question. So the first answer is, I do think that the army we have now is a different army than the one we had on October 6th. I think we have learned a lot of lessons. There will be a full investigation and heads will roll, but I think we have learned that we can't ignore the signals, that we can't ignore our female soldiers who are watching the border, the Tatzpitaniot, when they say that they're seeing activity, we can't just brush it off. And we know what Hamas is capable of. So I do think that the army we have now is not the same one we had on October 7th. Number 2, if Hamas so much as lifts a finger or fires a missile at us from Gaza, we can attack again and attack hard. And related to this is that the entire world is watching. The world knows if we have a ceasefire and Hamas attacks again, this isn't like in 2021, Guardian of the Walls, when no one was really paying attention that much aside from us here in Israel. The world knows what Hamas did on October 7th, and they know if there's a ceasefire, that if Hamas breaks it, they should expect that Israel can go back in. So I think the fact that we still have the upper hand in terms of strength, military strength, is an advantage to us. And number three, this is more of a dream fantasy-like scenario, but we have to believe, because even if it's a little bit naive, we have to believe that the Shin Bet and the army and the chief of staff and the minister of defense are correct. Because if we don't, we really don't have a chance to get the hostages out alive. Think about this. Of all the hostages in Gaza, 8 have come out alive because of rescue operations, and 105 have come out alive because of negotiations and diplomacy. And I think as much as we want to believe that pressure will work, we see what happens when there's military pressure. When there's military pressure and we get close enough to the hostages, Hamas just kills the hostages they have and flees. So Elaine, and to those of you who asked in the chat, is leaving the Philadelphia corridor the perfect solution? Obviously, it's not. But I just don't think we have a choice. I just don't think we're going to get hostages alive. If there's 64 hostages remaining, I don't see how we're going to get them out alive if we don't have some sort of ceasefire. I don't think we're going to rescue 64 more. It's clear we're not going to. So that was question one. Question two. This is a big one. So Rosalind asks, Joel, how do you envision Israel will look 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Well, the first thing I want to do is acknowledge that it is very hard to envision anything. And I tried to come up with a metaphor here, and here's what I thought of. It's like asking an amputee or someone who's about to have a limb amputated what he thinks his life will be like a year from now, as he's on the operating table about to have his limb amputated. There's just no way he could answer that question because all of his mind is focused on what he's about to go through. And that's where we are right now. We in Israel are completely focused on what's happening with Hamas, with the hostages, with Hezbollah, with Iran. You know, school started today. I told you September 1st. For all those kids in the north who are still displaced, they're doing school in hotel lobbies. I mean, this is the 21st century, a democracy. And we're schooling our kids in hotel lobbies and community centers because our north is being attacked by a terrorist organization. We can't think about what things are going to look like in a year, 5 or 10 from now. So I just want to acknowledge that we're so in it that it's hard to even imagine. And that's why you hear so many people in the US asking about the day after, because with all due respect, in the US, people have the luxury of being on their couches watching this on television and asking what the day after is going to be like. For us, we're living it. We don't have that luxury. Now, that said, I will try to answer this question a little bit. Let's talk about 1 year from now. I don't see things being all that different. I think we will still have some sort of presence in Gaza. It might not be battalions like we've had. It might be small strike forces, but I don't think we'll be completely withdrawn out of Gaza. I don't know. I would like to think that our families who are displaced from the north will be back in their homes within a year. I think they will be. I think kids will start school on September 1st, 2025 from their hometowns in the north. But we can't be sure of that either. Politically, I'm hearing that in November, I've heard from a few people that in November the government is going to fall. That whatever, I didn't quite get why. I asked for explanations, but whatever machinations the government has and opposition parties have that come November, it's all going to come together and the government is going to fall. So we might have new leaders by the end of this year, but there's no guarantee because our next elections aren't scheduled for, I think, over a year from now. In terms of 5 years, in 10 years, 10 years, I'm actually much more optimistic. I feel that we'll look back on this and see this as the horrible, horrible growing period we had to go through to get to where we are going to be 10 years from now, at least in terms of Gaza and the North. I think the real concern is the West Bank. We're not talking about that so much tonight, but there's a lot of violence brewing there, and Hamas, one of their goals is to try to stir up violence, and they're encouraging more suicide bombers to come into Israel from the West Bank. So that is going to be, I think, the big problem. I think something with Hezbollah will work out because Hezbollah doesn't want a war any more than we do. I think Iran, for all its bluster, doesn't actually want a war. I think there might be within 5 years some sort of world force coming together to help rebuild Gaza. And we've all seen that Hamas cannot be. I think Hamas today, by murdering those 6 hostages, including Hersh, really delegitimized itself as any kind of freedom fighting organization for the rest of the world. But the West Bank, I don't know. I don't know what happens there. And that is sort of the wild card that we're not paying attention to at the moment. But that could be what we're talking about down the road. In a way, I'm sort of punting here and not fully answering the question, but here's what I am doing. I reached out to David Pasig, who is a futurist. He's featured in my book, Israel 201. Actually, the last chapter of the book is an interview with him. And David Pasig is a true genius. He's won the Israel, I think it's called the Gold Prize for his books about the future. He's a renowned lecturer and professor, and basically he studies current trends, religious, economic, social, to predict what is going to happen in the future. He correctly predicted the 2001 Twin Tower attacks. He didn't know it would be the Twin Towers. But in the late 90s, he said that within 10 years, there will be a major attack by radical Islam on a symbol of Western capitalism. And the Twin Tower attacks happened. He was talking about refrigerators that could communicate with telephones long before anyone else was, to the point where some people dismissed him as wacky and out of his mind. But he could foresee where technology was going. So what I've reached out to him again to set up a podcast interview just with him to talk about what Israel looks like 5 years, 10 years from now. So although I can't answer your question directly, Rosalind, I will do that so I can bring you as best an answer I can. Our final question tonight is from Cheryl, and I think it's a question that a lot of you have on your mind. Cheryl writes, please let us know what we in the diaspora can do. She said, I'm sending money to Zaka. Zaka is the organization that collects and identifies the bodies and body parts and correctly makes sure they get proper burials here in Israel. But there are so many people who are displaced as well. So many of us want to help. What should we be doing? Well, financially, I do want to say that, giving to Zaka is wonderful. I also want to say that for every organization you give to, there are 99 others that you could be giving to, and there's almost no end. I think the important thing is that you're giving at all. I think sadly, too many North American Jews have turned off completely and are just not giving. So the fact that you're engaged in listening to this podcast and listening to others and reading Israel news and giving, that is what you should be doing. I would worry less about who you're giving to and just let's acknowledge that it's good that you are. There are other things you can do as well. I think calling universities in the US, the administrations, and telling them about the harm they're doing and the reputations. These presidents, they want the reputation of their university to be strong. And I think calling universities, letting them know that you're paying attention, I think that's important. I personally, I canceled my subscription to the New York Times. I was fed up with their coverage of Israel, and there's also now evidence coming out that it is biased, and there is anti-Semitism within some of the editorial board. You can look that story up. But that's another thing you can do is, and that's hard for me because I consider myself a Democrat and progressive, but at the same time, I just can't, I can't see myself continuing to give money to support quote unquote journalism like that, which is so biased against Israel. Um, but staying engaged and continuing to have conversations, I think that is so, so important. And talking to teens and college students, they're the ones who in many ways are going to be fighting the battles as they go off to college campuses. They need to know that you have their back and that you're there for them as a resource, and that if they're having an issue, that they can call up their local federation, their local synagogue, the local boards of their Jewish institutions to help them navigate the red tape of dealing with their own administrations. They're going to need your help and our help. So I think that's another thing you can do besides just the financial piece. This podcast will run on Wednesday. It'll drop on Apple and Spotify. So if you know someone who missed it and wasn't able to join tonight, you can listen there. And again, the link for these live broadcasts, I just put it in the chat. It's joelchasnoff.com/podcast. That's also where you can see links for Apple and Spotify. If you do listen to the Apple and Spotify podcasts, please give it a rating. I mean, that's a great way to help get the pod out there. Apple and Spotify, they really use these ratings to decide who they're going to promote and who they're not. And in case you missed last week we ran a podcast episode that did not run on Sunday night. It was an interview with Susan Weiss, who is the executive director of the Center for Women's Justice. We talked about marriage and divorce laws in Israel. It's very intricate, very bizarre, and also very biased both against men and women. So check out that podcast with Susan Weiss. We have other interviews coming to you down the road. Our next Inside Israel is going to be next Sunday night. That's the 8th of September at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. For now, I want to thank all of you for joining. And hey, I got through with my voice. So for all of you who gave me great advice, I really appreciate it. Although I won't lie, it's feeling really scratchy and dry right now. So like I'm just making it to the finish line. Thank you so much for joining. It's always, I don't know if pleasure is the right word, but it's very meaningful for me, especially living here with everything going on, to be able to share what I'm feeling and to share our perspectives here. It's so different than I think what you're seeing in media coverage in the US, North America, wherever you are in the world. As I was walking tonight into these protests, I don't agree with everything every protester says, but I thought it was really wonderful that, all these people, so many teenagers were there as well, are coming together because they love Israel and want Israel to have a strong and secure future. And that to me is a reason to live here. For all the chaos, all the craziness, it's the people who make this country wonderful. So if I can share that with you as well, I'm honored. Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I will see you next week again, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Signing off from Ra'anana.